This is That So Second Millennium, where we explore issues at the interface between science, philosophy, and Catholic theology. I'm your host, Paul Giesting, and your co-host is Bill Schmidt.
Darcia Narvaez is an innovative and influential scholar of psychology and is a professor of psychology emerita at the University of Notre Dame. She writes books, blogs, and creates digital content to serve both academic and everyday audiences. She reaches out to seekers of natural insight and morality who want to reflect the best of human wisdom in their parenting and in all their encounters. The book that may best sum up her work is Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom, published in 2014. In 2017, she received the Expanded Reason Award, a distinctive honor bestowed by the Joseph Ratzinger Benedict XVI Foundation. It recognizes pioneers whose research and programs reflect Pope Benedict's roadmap to broaden the horizons of reason. Bill and I have had the privilege to interview Professor Narvaez twice previously. She cares deeply about the challenges that are crucial to human flourishing, challenges that are in some ways more daunting now than ever. This is episode 138 of That So Second Millennium. In this interview, we return to the question of early human development and its critical role in shaping our lives. Professor Narvaez takes very radical positions about the needs that babies have for attention and physical touch. For very many of us, our experience was not at all what she proposes as the healthy norm. It's worth thinking very carefully about how far human experience has drifted from the world our ancestors inhabited. In the modern world, it's easy to look at the many riches we have in terms of food, industrial capacity, and medicine, and overlook the things we've lost in terms of focus on work, productivity, entertainment, and material possessions over family, friendships, and community relationships. It might seem impossible to change how we parent or to support parents and children in our communities to conform to her standards, but gradually and with prayer and reflection, we can find ways to put the quintessential human goods of relationships into more prominent roles in our lives and push back against the idols of our time. Here's our third interview with Dr. Darcia Narvaez.
It's very good to have you back with us, Dr. Narvaez. I thought that now would be a perfect time to tap your wisdom and insight again, because it does seem to be what I had always heard was a curse. We're living in challenging times, right? And the perfect storm of many different things seems to be happening, but it's beyond so many of us, especially since we're so distracted by media and by the current story du jour. It's very hard to actually piece together even the start of a diagnosis of the things that are happening in society and in culture globally, and just as importantly, I think you'd agree, just as importantly, the local culture, that right down to the individual. And that's what you have a keen grasp on, the connections between all of those things. Can we ask you to just kind of maybe paint a diagnosis kind of picture of where you see us now with reference to a number of the things that you study in psychology?
Certainly. Glad to be with you. Pleasure.
Thank you.
I have determined that we are on a trauma-inducing pathway that we've been on more and more in the last centuries, millennia, perhaps, depending on what you count, where we undercare for young people, for children, for babies especially. They especially need intensive care because their brain is being constructed. They're only born at full-term birth with 25% of the adult-sized brain. So a lot's happening in those first years, and every experience matters. And we kind of forgot that because adults have been distracted by their own needs and work and everything, and the culture kind of says, oh, babies are resilient, doesn't matter what you do, and you've got to teach them independence, or you're going to spoil them, and all this stuff that's actually the opposite of what is true. And so you create people who are dysregulated. So at various levels, all the way to the immune system, the stress response, the neurotransmitters, all that's affected by poor early care, sending babies to daycare at 6 weeks because moms have to work, because we don't have paid maternal leave for several years, as other advanced nations have. And so then you end up with children who are dysregulated and disconnected from their parents too, because they're all busy and everyone is running around. And then they become adults who are also not well and have all sorts of health problems, as we can see in our country. In the United States, we have epidemics of all sorts of health problems, physical health problems, mental health problems, suicide. I mean, it's every age now. It's unbelievable. Even pregnant women, apparently, there's a increase in suicide. It's just I just heard that today. It's horrific. And then, so these adults who are all dysregulated and distracted, and they over control or under control, or they're just not centered, and they're not heart centered. They are trained to be just suppress their spirits and not develop their full selves. And then their gut reactions, their survival systems are very easily triggered, because they were so stressed, toxically stressed in babyhood, then leads to a brain that's easily threatened and then goes into the threat mode easily. And that reverses all the blood flow. It makes you not able to think very well, because the blood is going to your muscles to run or fight, and so it becomes habitual here, dispositional. And those adults then keep a similar kind of culture going. And so we have a 6-minute film, breakingthecyclefilm.org, and we talk about the 2 cycles. Right now, we are in a cycle of competitive detachment, undercare, ill-being, no wisdom, and then the cycle keeps going. The culture tells us stories to keep the cycle going. Now, that's not our heritage. We've been around for 6 million years. You could say maybe 2 million at least, depending on how you count the hominid evolution. And this is a recent phenomenon. Our ancestors, we wouldn't be here if our ancestors had acted the way we're acting, obviously. Pretty obvious. So what we inherited, what our normal species typical way of being, is the wellness-informed pathway, where you meet the basic needs of the young without resistance. You give in to the baby's needs with humility. And then they develop a very regulated, cooperative, connected way of being with others. And they turn into adults who are well and become wise. And then they keep a culture going of cooperative companionship. And that then is what we see in societies that meet the basic needs of their children, which especially the babies. We call that the evolved nest, when you meet their needs according to our species' normal way of growing and developing our young. And what we see in societies that do that is you got thriving people, and they're happy and they're healthy and they get along well and they're cooperative and empathic. They listen, they're connected to other people, but also to the natural world. They're not careless. They're not arrogant. They're not wasteful. And those are the values then that are part of what we call the kinship worldview, primal wisdom, or indigenous wisdom, depending on how you want to call it. And so I'm seeing that at every level we're just deteriorating. It's like we're turning to ashes, this world, and nature and the human nature. We forgot what it is, right? Because we don't have the role models. Our baselines have shifted so much over the centuries to think this is normal and this is all we got.
Yeah. And is it somehow inevitable that things would be getting worse? Part of me likes to point the finger at everything from violence and economy weakness and COVID and now war fears and all of that. Are those things kind of feeding this decay or making us less resilient toward it? What's the effect of current themes on that very basic truth that you point out?
I think it's interrelated. So the stories we tell ourselves are then shaping how we act and how we treat children. And then our So there's a top-down effect of that, stories and institutions and policies and practices. But then there's the bottom-up aspect of how we raise children really, really matters, but people don't pay attention, right? And so then you've undermined, like building a house without a steady, sturdy foundation. You know, you can keep going for a while, but when that storm comes, when something it's going to tip over, and you can have all these problems, and that's what happens when you have biological gaps in the brain that develop from undercare. I call it undercare when you don't have the nest, and it comes later, so you don't see it right away in the baby. The baby just learns to shut up and just survive, right? But then there's gaps that, you know, they'll be depressed, suicidal, anxious, and they come up in adolescence, even adulthood, suicidality, all this stuff. We can see now. Science is showing us. So these practices of leaving babies to cry, making them sleep by themselves, which is all very unnatural for a mammal, all those ideas came before we had the science, the neuroscience, the developmental neuroscience that shows us the damage that can be done.
Yeah. One follow-up, last follow-up. This might be overly on the borderline of overly political or overly simplistic, but when you mentioned that, you know, we're essentially telling our young people to shut up and just be something less than they can be. I'm thinking of the masking situation with schools and how that became a real hot potato issue. And so many people seem to be scared that the masks are at least an outward sign of something deeply wrong with our relationship with kids. Is there any wisdom in that?
I think the mask situation is rather complicated because at first they didn't realize it was transmitted by air and breathing. They thought it was touch, you know, so they sprayed everything. And then they realized, oh, it's through the air, and standing 3 feet or less next to someone, you can get those particles. But so the mask thing is I don't know, it's become so politicized, it's hard to say. I think it probably wasn't good for babies to be around people with masks on because they're learning something and stuff.
Yeah, they can't.
But the new study came out on preschoolers and elementary school, I think, showing that their language development was not affected.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, so but I think the bigger thing is the pandemic, having a virus that attacks us is a signal that we've been mistreating the earth, creation, because it's us moving into these environments and mowing down forests and being in contact with animals we don't usually get in contact with, that then their viruses leap to us. It should be noted, though, that we carry viruses, we carry fungi, we carry bacteria. They keep us alive. They keep, we're very complicated communities, each of us, our bodies. Our microbiome is amazing. It keeps us alive. So we don't want to be killing off the microbes, really. It's when we're not healthy and we have so many unhealthy people in the United States, then it's easy to get sick and to have, even die from this kind of COVID. But viruses are there to make you stronger. The evolution is about making you stronger and stronger. You get a little sick and then you're stronger for the next time. That's usually how it works. Yeah. And the complexity of it all, we've just sort of forgotten that. And we forgot that we're part of the youth community. We're not, separated. That's crazy. God didn't make us separate. God created the earth, all of us together as community members, and in our long heritage of millions of years of being here, we were cooperative with the rest of the natural world. We didn't exterminate or want to kill off. We lived with predators. We lived with all the other animals and plants.
We should be using these tough times as a kind of opportunity to embrace a sense of resilience in us, huh? But otherwise, we're kind of really feeling weak and victimized and just kind of not a match to the task ahead.
Yeah, that's because we forgot so many skills of living well on the earth with the biocommunity. That's our normal species way of growing and being, just like every other species gets along, unless they encounter an angry, scared human.
They probably encounter those more often than in the past.
Fortunately, yeah. So I think we have to get back to restoring our abilities. We have instincts to get along, right? We have instincts to connect with each other, but also with the natural world. And we have to get back to those to really fulfill our human nature.
Well said. Paul? Yeah.
I had a question I tried to follow up on, something that went by, especially the comment about, viruses being there to make us stronger, and then thinking about the role of, parenting, nesting. There's a certain skill of, inferring when it's good to challenge your child, when it's, what the appropriate level of nurture, and then stretching them and then nurturing them again so that they can, process and gain the lessons and physically recover, whatever it might be. Could you talk about that a little bit? What role it's assigned to that?
Sure. Now, this gets tricky for Westerners to think about, but we should be letting the child guide us for what they need. So you have to understand what the nest is, which is pretty much carrying the child, the baby, all the time until they want to move. Then you let them move. But whenever they're ready to be in your arms, you're there in your arms or on your back or next to you all the time. That's vital for growing the brain and the body well. And then to really follow their interests. And there's certain things that children develop interest in. And most of childhood should be playing, physical, social playing outside, free, not corralled, not in the stroller, not limited, and not teaching babies to read, not teaching preschoolers to read, not forcing them to sit and learn to do worksheets. This is killing them. It's killing their imagination, kills their social skills. I mean, they're oriented to immersed learning. So everything you can do as a parent to help them be free and immersed in a safe environment, right? So it means not, of course, running in the street. So, but you don't want to say no to a young child, a 2-year-old. They're still learning. They don't have the capacity to, they don't have the empathic capacity to take your perspective. So they don't know that when they're hitting the stick onto somebody that it's hurting you. But in our ancestral context, that turns into a game because everyone knows that a 2-year-old is not human yet. They're still learning to be human. And so you just tease the child and, no punishment. So no corporal punishment. Half of parents admit that they spank their 1-year-olds. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, that's a terrible thing because it shifts the trajectory of development away from, blossoming like a beautiful flower. That's your life goal, right? To find your gifts to share with the world. Instead, then you hunker down. You start to get self-protective. You start to not follow your heart, and not develop your intuition about how to get along well in the world. So we have to, as Westerners, let go. And one of the good books to get a sense of this back from the 70s is The Continuum Concept by Jean Liedloff. About her, she was an accidental anthropologist, really. Spent a lot of time in the Amazon. And she wrote about the contrast in how the people were and how they raised their children with her upbringing as a socialite in New York City. And so it's I think it inspires. So I urge you to read that.
That sounds great. Yeah. Yeah. Too often nowadays, the parents kind of impose a different image of imagination on kids and indeed on everyone. It's not so much about the freedom to blossom. But gee, look at how they're so creative and so able at a young age with computers and social media, and they will be imaginative with virtual reality and artificial reality and all of that. But that's not really the kind of pathway toward imagination that you're describing.
Right.
Huh?
Because that's too narrow. It's too limited. It's okay for teenagers after they've had a childhood of running around and playing socially. And it's something they can pick up very quickly. So, but getting along face to face and recognizing signals and controlling your aggression when you're playing with somebody, which you have to do, or they'll stop playing with you. If you don't learn that in childhood, it's hard to learn it later. So that's vital for there's just a million things you have to know to be able to play well with somebody and be free and open and cooperative and coordinating. That, if you've got a child who's been sitting in front of a screen their whole childhood, they're not going to be able to do that. And they're going to have trouble getting along, and they will want their own way. So one of the things that happens when you're under care for a child is you're enhancing those survival systems, fear, rage, panic, that we're born with to keep us alive. And now you've enhanced them and underdeveloped the cooperative, egalitarian, relational attunement aspects. And so it's you become a black and white kind of thinker. You get a dominant submission orientation to life because you don't know anything else. That's how you were treated. You were treated, to shut up or whatever it is, go sleep by yourself. And I love you. Really?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is, so I work at multiple levels, and I started working in moral development when it was as a grad student, when it was focused on reasoning and thinking and will. And after reading widely, realized, that's a late signal of moral development. It starts in the neurobiology. So are you going to be open and relationally attuned? Are you capable of that? Are you going to honor whoever you meet? Are you flexible enough to do that? Are you confident enough to do that? Or are you oriented to, dominating whoever you meet, judging them, categorizing them, treating them more like an object? So the nest experience is going to help you learn to treat others like a I-thou relationship, where you are honoring them for their uniqueness, and you're there to witness and to encourage the beauty in the other person. Otherwise, you're learning I-it relationships, to use to treat others like objects. What can I get from you? How can I manipulate you? How can I make you do what I want? How can I feel safe away from you, or whatever, withdraw or oppose you? So it's really critical. This is about spirituality, right? How we are in the world, how our being is, how connected we feel to the universe as well, because the right hemisphere is growing in those early years more rapidly. And the right hemisphere, especially at that time, governs your self-regulation of all sorts of systems. It governs your empathy and is related to your higher consciousness, your ability to let go of yourself and connect to something greater than yourself. So it's very spiritual. It's really important part of our humanity. And we've kind of neglected it, and we've undermined it for several hundred years.
Oh, yeah. And just at a time when the goal seems to be more of a kind of global family, global citizenship, globalism, in whatever ways that's supposed to imply. But we're not even capable of local relationship in a meaningful way right now. It's hard to imagine that that kind of global fraternity would be any easier, and probably would be wind up more artificial. No?
Well, there are things to do. I think we have to adapt and learn from what has worked for people. And something I've learned recently is how the mother's emotional expression towards a child, no matter what age, a child is about being connected and feeling sad when they weren't connected, to express those things actually then starts to reconnect them. And the child then gets back in sync with the mother at very physiologically, various levels. I think we need to do that with one another when we meet someone in the street and try to be there with them, not in the I-it relationship, but in the we are, the I-thou relationship. To be able to self-calm and not get panicked or anger or afraid. So you have to learn practices to self-calm, and then to be reaching out to the other. And the more you do that, the more practice you have, the more it will become automatic.
That's a good point. And your references there really do resonate. A Pope Francis kind of message about, he uses terms like encountering the other and accompanying the other and listening and really making it a two-way street in relationships. And when one pictures a global citizenry with those kinds of characteristics, I can picture it, but otherwise I can't.
Yeah, I think we have to build around us wherever we are, but we can also build. Zoom allows us to connect with people who are across the ocean, and so to keep others in mind, right? We want to keep them in mind as beings that matter. And I think we have a lot of images of the opposite, but to not let go of faith that we are in this together, that we are all connected, that we are really one in the Lord, in God's creation.
Yeah. I know that Darcia is very involved in kind of problem-solving efforts to address these kinds of concerns, and you've done work with your class at various times, etc. Are there other things that you just started going into it? Are there some other things that would entail things that we should start trying right now, or is spreading some efforts?
Well, I always recommend play. So for adults to play with young children in particular, because they get into it. And then you lose your self-consciousness because you're there with them. And that's and what happens when you're playing in this whole body way is your right hemisphere is growing. Your capacities for empathy, your capacities for self-control, your capacities for higher consciousness are all going to be growing when you're playing. So and that's why it's so important for kids to do that as much as possible, but also adults. In our ancestral context, adults were playing a lot too. Lots of singing and dancing and interactions and teasing. So let's do that. And when we get into that moment and that way of being, then we're much more flexible. We become more intelligent because intelligence is about flexibility.
Oh, that's well said. Yeah. Gosh. And COVID did do some damage on that front, too. There was less play in the sense of just gatherings in a family living room or even chances to go to sporting events or be part of sporting events.
Well, I think some families, though, played more at home together. Is that beneficial for some families? Not all families, but... And sports is not quite the same thing. That's controlled by some structure, right? And it's usually controlled over the children. It's not the same as free play, which is what we advocate.
Oh, very interesting. How could people learn more about the free play? Because now we're such a sports-centered culture. When we think play, that's what we think.
Well, there's various things at evolvenest.org. We have all sorts of information about the nest components, and free play is one of them. It's also important to play in the natural world. And Richard Louv is the one who has done the most visible work on this. He's got several books, Last Child in the Woods, Vitamin N, which has lots of, I think, 500 ideas for how to get out in the natural world.
Really?
In a play often, yeah.
That's good. Vitamin N being nature?
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Well, all of these things can be parts of our show notes accompanying the episode. whether or not this is actually on tape, as it were. Please, what other things, what other links can we furnish, et cetera, to let people get to know your work better, including the new book?
We did an experiment that was published last year with undergraduates at Notre Dame on
Really?
trying to build their nature connection. We called it ecological attachment. Just kind of mini steps towards indigenous connection. And they had a pretest, and then they read an essay about facts about how important the condition was, a poem, an essay about it. And we had two conditions. One, the critical one, was the ecological attachment or nature connection one. And what they did after the pretest, they had, and then after the readings, they selected 21 activities to do out of maybe 40 some that we gave them. And they took those 21 in an envelope, and then every day for the next 3 weeks, they pulled one out of the envelope to do that day. Wow. And then they came back for a post-test. And we found there was an increase in ecological attachment after just little nudges, So one nudge would be acknowledge the trees on the campus as you walk by today. Watch the clouds today. Right? Just to get you back down into the earth. And so what we've done at evolveness.org, we've created, well, actually we have a website for this, ecoattachment.dance, and do 28 days of these little nudges.
Wow. I love it. And the Evolved Nest website is kind of broader in scope than that, even, eh?
So the Evolved Nest includes then soothing perinatal experiences. There's 9 components. Soothing perinatal experiences, extensive breastfeeding on request, welcoming social climate, lots of positive touch, no negative touch, self-directed free play, social play, ideally, responsive care, responsive relationships, multiple adult, stable, responsive relationships, nature, immersion, and connection, and routine healing practices. And these are the things we see in our ancestral context that we now can say are linked to health and well-being because we have the neuroscience to show it.
That is something. Yeah. Well, if we can get Americans and people everywhere to be a little bit less distracted by, the shiny object that enters the field of vision, and a little bit more into, as you say, kind of being grounded and noticing things, that would obviously go a long way just toward the reduction of polarization, I think, in society, wouldn't it? We would appreciate each other's qualities, each other's benefits and contributions they make, etc.
Doing things together helps also to bring to decrease polarization. So building a community garden, for example.
Very good, yeah.
Being outside together, cleaning up a park or those kinds of things, or arranging play. Let's Play America arranges street closures, and then as you play, the whole neighborhood play together, that kind of.
Well, and I know that you're a musician as well, and I have to say that you're reminding me of the times that I spent out in South Bend at the Music Village, and how just playing music of no particular quality level, but with 20 other folks, just impromptu musicianship, it was so refreshing, and it really does take you out of yourself and into reality.
Yes, that reminds me of one of the, let's see, I think it was Black Lives Matter, perhaps, or one of the protests, demonstrations. There were neo-Nazis or some very angry people that came along, and what the more peaceful group did was they turned up the music and played music that they could all dance to.
Whoa.
Turn up the music and let's dance.
Yep. Yeah. Peace Train also kind of forget this other stuff.
That's how you play. That's play.
Yeah. Oh, I like it. Yeah. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time now, but we really do appreciate talking with you at this time, and hopefully in the future times as well. Are you a professor emerita now?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. But that's not going to slow you down one bit, am I?
That's right. I'm just getting out of meetings.
Well, very good. Everyone should be an emerita.
It can be the time when
thank
things.
You very much for spending that time.
Yes, but it can be the time when things can actually happen that have needed to happen for a long time. Yeah, it was great to have you on.
Yeah, play opens up and liberates.
Thanks for listening to this episode of That's So Second Millennium. TSSM's audio producer is Morgan Burkhardt. Our theme music, Igneous Grok, was composed and performed by Vin Marquardt. For my co-host Bill Schmidt, I'm Paul Giesting. Until next time.